Mary and Sherry took over education. I did that for a while, a couple of times. And Kevin jokingly says that I'm the most educated beekeeper that doesn't do anything, because mostly he's doing the heavy lifting and I'm taking pictures. So, although last summer he told you we caught that really mean swarm in July, and I was feeding it in August and September, and pretty much every time I went out there, they either stung me or tried to sting me. And I even got stung probably by one of them while I was in the middle of the backyard. So on the one side, it's good to have these bees because it's likely that they're survivor bees. On the other side, I mean, if we were smart, we might want to put a new queen in there to kind of calm down the genetics and make them a little less aggressive. But that's another thing about beekeeping. If you think you're not going to get stung, you're fooling yourself. And so just get used to the idea that you will get stung and figure out what works for you in terms of either preventing stings, because we started out with just veils and quickly went to full jackets with hoods. We know people that went to full suits, or that helps calm down the sting once you get stung. So I'm going to bring up my presentation, which is, I guess, chapter 7, and get that started. So one of the important, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't share my screen, so none of you can see it. All right, here we go. Now, does everyone see the slideshow? Good? Mary, is it good?
Yeah, it's not in slideshow, but the PowerPoint is up.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. So honey flow. Well, one of the important things for bees is obviously food, just like it is for all of us. And the bee's purpose, besides reproducing, is, you're going to have to excuse me for just a second. My dogs are causing some problems here. Sorry about that, guys. So anyways, the bees obviously need food. And so besides reproduction, a lot of their energy is taken up collecting pollen and nectar so that they can raise brood and survive the winter. And one of the things that you're going to want to know as a beekeeper is, when is nectar available for the bees to get, so that they can again survive the winter and use that energy to do what they need to do. So when is the honey flow on? Well, that's going to vary from place to place. I don't know where all of you are from. Even in the Spokane area, it varies. So for example, within the city limits of Spokane, we know people that get lots and lots of honey because there are so many flowers available and there's a lot of water for those flowers. Out where we live on the West Plains, the honey flow is generally from the time the service berries bloom in late May until probably sometime in early July, depending on how much water we get. If we're lucky and it's a little bit moister, it may go on a little bit longer. We have wild sweet clover out here, at least around our property, and we see a lot of bees on that. But if you're in the wheat fields, it's just going to basically be the time the wildflowers bloom, which is, again, probably mid-May to early July. Like Kevin said, you don't want to be opening the hive to see if the bees are bringing in honey, or nectar, I'm sorry. So weighing the hive is one of the best ways to know when the honey flow is on, because when there's a lot of nectar, the bees are bringing it in and turning it into honey, and the weight of the hive increases. And so if you're weighing your hive on a weekly basis, you should see a spike in the weight in, again, May to July. The spike is not going to all be honey. It will also be bees, but you will know that the nectar's on by the weight of the hive. Okay, how do I get this thing? Okay, so one of the things that you'll want to know as a beekeeper is that you're going to want to be a little bit more cognizant of the plants that are blooming and whether they have good nectar and pollen. Nectar is important for honey. Pollen is important because it's bee protein, and it's what the bees use to raise their brood. And the bees also can use it in the wintertime. So a lot of people think that the bees are going to get most of their nectar and pollen when orchards are in bloom, but that's really a very small percentage of what the bees use when they're going out for pollen and nectar. In the early spring, the bees are out on pussy willows, maples, alder. There's a little tiny flower called salt and pepper that they're out on. And, almost as soon as things are blooming, the bees are out collecting pollen and nectar. You can tell when they're collecting pollen. You will see it on their legs. You can see in these pictures, the bees have pollen in the little honey or pollen baskets that they have on their back legs. They're collecting it, and they will take it back to the hive. And it's really cool to watch the bees going into the hive with pollen on them, and you'll see all sorts of different colors of pollen depending on what's blooming. Another interesting thing about bees is that they will fly from 3 to 5 miles in order to collect pollen and nectar. Generally, what they do is communicate with one another about the nectar source using the waggle dance, which is super amazing, and I suggest that you look it up on YouTube. Super amazing because basically they use the sun as their directional point, and the amount of times that they waggle signifies the distance from the hive. And they do the waggle dance in the dark, and other bees are able to perceive it and use it to go out after nectar and pollen. The bees are not just going out willy-nilly and getting nectar and pollen. If a bee finds a good nectar and pollen source, it will indicate this to its fellow bees through this waggle dance. And there's some competition in terms of who's doing the best or longest or greatest waggle dance. And the bees will go to that best nectar and pollen source, and they will exhaust it before they go out looking for another pollen and nectar source. It's crazy, you have this tiny little insect with a brain that's the size of a rice, and it's just amazing what they do. So, as I said before, fruit trees are a good source of nectar and pollen for bees, but the bloom time is relatively short. And another thing that I want to let everybody know about, because I often do the things that cause problems for bees, is this is one of the things that can kill your bees too. If your neighbor or somebody you know has an orchard and they're spraying pesticides during the blossom, first of all, they're breaking the law because they're using pesticides in an inappropriate way. But second, they're going to kill your bees because that is when the pollinators are on the fruit, or on the trees is when it's in bloom. So if you have a neighbor with blossoming trees, apples, cherries, whatever, you may want to go talk to them and say, hey, when do you spray? And it's not a question of whether or not they spray. If they have cherries, again, they're obligated under Washington state law to spray. So it's not whether or not they're going to spray, it's when they're going to spray. And you can educate people about when it's appropriate to spray fruit trees. Your bees will be in your flower garden. It's kind of interesting. Like I said, the bees don't go to plants willy-nilly. So I have a number of plants in my yard that bees generally like, but there's not enough of them to really help the hive. And so for example, my lavender, I sometimes see bees, but more often I see bumblebees. So again, the bees have found a nectar or pollen source that provides more resources for the hive, and they're going there and not necessarily to my flowers. But these are all flowers that the bees use. I used to say I never saw a bee on a marigold, and then I had a picture of a bee in one of these presentations, and it was on my marigold plants. And just some more flowers that you can plant that are attractive to bees. You'll notice that a lot of them are blue. I think that really does have to do with the spectrum that the bees are seeing, because their eyes are different than ours. They see a different color spectrum. Or I should say, they see the same color spectrum, it's just shifted. Just a few more of the different kinds of flowers. Let me see. So somebody is asking, I don't know how you're dealing with questions, but someone says, pesticides are a concern of mine. Any information on laws? Well, I mean, you can go onto the Washington State Code, but basically it's against the law to use pesticides in a way that's not on the label. And so, and it may even say that on the labels. So, but, you know, in terms of educating your neighbors, be kind. You know, no one likes somebody to be up in their face about stuff. I mean, if you go over and say, hey, I have bees, you know, if you spray stuff while it's in bloom, you're probably going to kill them. Would you mind waiting, you know, either spraying before it's in bloom, which is probably when they should spray, or waiting until it's done blooming? You can probably talk your neighbor into it. Most people don't want to kill bees. So, Sherry, do you want to say anything else about the flowers that we're seeing here?
No, what you want to do is you want to try to keep stuff going all year long. So that's a big thing. So you can start here and go there.
Right.
Also, I suggest that you plant plenty because they're going to share, and that's wasps, bumblebees, parasitic wasps, everybody will. So try not to make them compete so hard. And other than that, it's, you know, and you can also get other pollinators. That's more what my thing is, but
yeah, you will get other pollinators. Like I said, I often see bumblebees more than I see bees. One of the good plants to plant are asters, because that's a fall flowering plant, and that's often when the bees are starting to, or I shouldn't say starting, but that's often when they're having difficulties finding flowers that have pollen and nectar for them to use.
And the best plants I found to acclimate my garden are those dollar store boxes that have like the wildflower thing, and you throw them out there, and I have got some great plants. So they live, they work good, you know. And my yard is almost all clover, not as many daffodils, but lots of clover in my grass.
And these are, again, all plants that the bees are interested in. Another thing, I planted borage, which I would not necessarily recommend because it is, it just comes up year after year. You cannot get rid of it, but it's also a really good bee flower.
Oh, and another thing is pay attention to where you're planting these things. If you don't want a bunch of pollinators around your deck, don't plant a hawthorn tree there, you know, because they will come.
From personal experience.
Yes, I am. So yeah, you know, they can go out away from the deck a little bit. So
here are some of the trees and bushes that you can plant. If you have maple, that's an early bloomer. We don't really see the blossom, but that's something that the bees get onto quite early. Probably one of the first things. Pussy willow is also one of the first things. Our sweet clover is what we have a lot of out here. Sunflowers, they like. Alfalfa, bees like alfalfa, but they're not really designed for alfalfa. Anything that has a long flower that they would have to get into is not really designed for honeybees. Oh, yes. One of the things that bees really like are things that are considered noxious weeds. So you can see here there's a bee on a thistle, Dutch clover, knapweed. That was a big joke when I first started taking beekeeping lessons. Knapweed is a noxious weed in Spokane County, and you might get a letter from the Spokane County Weed Board if you have knapweed or thistles. And again, just be careful when you're getting rid of them or trying to get rid of them. I don't know if you can get rid of knapweed because you don't want to poison them when the bees are going to be on them. Dandelions are a great early flower for bees. So if you can, don't kill them when the flower is out. Also a big joke at my house because my husband and I are from the Midwest, and in the Midwest, if you have dandelions in your yard, I don't know, he has some kind of crazy tick that happens when he sees dandelions in the yard. So, but if you can calm that down and not get rid of them for the flower, that's something that the bees can really use in the early spring. And just some more different kinds of flowers that we see in our area. Native plants. Serviceberry only blooms for about a week in May, but I have noticed in our area that the serviceberries have gone crazy in terms of blooming. We have so many more blooming now that we have bees than we did when we first moved out here. And that is about it. So we do plant some things for the bees, but again, I really don't see them very much around on my flowers. They do like asparagus when it goes to seed after you're done with it. There's a lot of pollen on asparagus. They like the pollen on corn, although corn is not pollinated by bees. So are there any questions until this?
I don't have any on the chat. Hey, Kevin, you can unmute yourself if you want to.
I will.
Sorry. Yeah, that's easier.
I'll stop the share.
Margot, since we're neighbors, if you could plant, I think I asked this last time, but out on the West Plains, it's kind of barren out here. If you could plant one thing that was easy, what would you plant for the bees? I mean, we got some black locust trees and vegetable garden, but there's only so much out here. Like, what's easy to plant and why?
You probably could get sweet clover seed. That probably would work. What I've noticed about sweet clover is it kind of likes the edges of things, like the edges of roads, and kind of. It does not need a lot of water, and it kind of likes the edges of stuff. And the bees really like sweet clover. If you don't mind, it taking over, I would plant borage because that doesn't really need a lot of water. It also goes crazy and the bees really like it. But in terms of a more native plant, I'd say sweet clover is your best bet. I'm sorry, sweet clover. Or another type of clover that we've had some luck with is called Alsiki clover.
Heard of both of those.
What's borage?
Yeah, borage.
Yeah.
It's a herb.
And can you just toss seed down and water it?
That's more of a gardener question. But
I'm a gardener, so I thought I'd throw it out there. I
think,
came out when I heard plants being talked about.
Yeah, for sweet clover, possibly.
Okay.
You need a good you need good contact with the soil
Yeah.
and moisture for
Right.
germination, like
But I-
any garden plant.
Yeah, but I
Okay.
think once the sweet clover gets established, you may have a
Good
hard
to
time
go.
getting rid of it. And borage, once it gets established, I've done everything. I planted it in a raised bed, and it's not only taken over the raised bed, but it's kind of expanded from the raised bed. I put newspaper down. I did all sorts of stuff to try. I pull it. I got borage. I'll have borage this year too.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Thanks.
So
Yeah, we'll
it's
keep
one
it
of
away
those-
from the yard. We got a fenced yard,
it's-
but beyond that is weeds
yeah,
mostly.
it's not like mint, where if you stick it in the ground, the roots just go all over, but it self seeds and it just
Okay.
goes.
Oh, that's what you want.
Thank
I
you.
think.
Okay. So any other plant questions? Again, they should probably go to Sherry because she's more of a gardener than I am. My philosophy is I stick it in the ground, I water it. If it dies, oh well. It was meant to
And
be.
that's kind of my theory. If the horses and the deer and the bugs don't
Right,
get it, it can
Right, the
feed,
deer.
work around it.
Well,
But
I have
basically-
a few suggestions. If you're a gardener and you put down a cover crop at all, if you don't have a big garden, you probably won't do this, but rapini is a great fall annual plant. And again, I suspect it's going to be receding, but the plants I planted last year bloomed from September until hard frost. So it's a good source of late fall nectar. And the other
Do
thing
you get that in seed, Mary?
what's that?
Do you get it in seed or can you
I
buy
actually-
a plant?
I actually got it's seed, and it
Okay,
germinates quite easily, and I actually got the seed from BegBee. It's
Oh,
one
yeah.
that,
So that's one of
yeah,
the bee catalogs.
a bee catalog. But you can find it.
Yeah,
The other
Sorry, what?
thing,
What was that one called?
rapini.
rapini, or
Is
there's
it ar-
another word for it. It's rapina. If you look it up on the web, it's in the same family that broccoli. It's a relative of broccoli. And actually it's edible too. I mean, you could, as a muncher, you could eat it. So,
Thank you.
but the other thing, definitely like Sherry and folks have talked about, look around you, see what plants go through the season in your area. And for instance, in my area, the plants I want to plant are early spring and late summer into fall, because that's when we have a dearth. And I'm in a town, so I think we're a little bit better situated than some of the folks out in the county because there's a lot of flower gardens and veggie gardens. So my honey flow season is actually a little longer than what Margot talks about. So
Yeah, and the apiary is on the edge of Medical Lake, the town of Medical Lake. And it's within view of Medical Lake, the actual lake. And it seems to do pretty well, but out where I live, we're super lucky if we get any honey for ourselves, which, isn't that big of a deal. I don't mind honey. Like Kevin says, I don't like to eat honey. I like to eat honey, but I agree with him. The worst part of beekeeping is extraction. So if we don't have honey to extract, I am not sad.
That is sticky you have never understood in your life.
Yeah, exactly. And everything is
Ugh.
sticky.
Yeah.
Everything is sticky. Plus you're working, you have to keep the honey very hot in order to, actually, we're going to get into that next, in order for it to flow in the extractor. So you're working, not only is it sticky, but it's hot and sticky. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen.